Welcome back, everybody, to the Joey Osborne Show. I'm your host, Joey Osborne. For today's video, it is Super Bowl Sunday, and we're going to do a Super Bowl special. Now, it's been a little bit since I haven't been doing it, but we're back here again today, and we're going to talk about the big news in sports, especially this week. A lot of different stuff going on. The NBA, pretty much the wheels going off the wagon when it comes to trades. A lot of big names going different places, and then obviously this week, the big Super Bowl as the six-time Super Bowl champion in New England Patriots, as much as I hate to say it, are back with Drake May, and the Seattle Seahawks under Sam Darnold, which is kind of astonishing. Sam Darnold is actually good now, but, well, they just had to get away from the Jets there. So, a big matchup tonight for the NFL as the season concludes. But first, let's get into, obviously, the NBA stuff. Obviously, one of the big trades we saw this week was, of course, the Cavs and the Clippers switching their point guards of Darius Garland and a second-round pick going to the Clippers in exchange for James Harden. And it's definitely a big move, a big swing by, honestly, both organizations. I would say, obviously, the Clippers now seemingly looking to rebuild after multiple failed attempts at playoff success. Obviously, Kawhi Leonard's injuries helping that, as well as the team overall just not making the best moves, so clearly more of a step toward most likely a rebuild, and they get themselves a young two-time All-Star in Darius Garland. While he does have injury concerns, like some other people on that team, definitely, if you can get a piece like that for James Harden, you do get that, especially with a aging 36-year-old point guard in the mix. And then the Cavs, obviously, you look at that as they're trying to win the East. They look at the East, they see it's very weak this year. They're looking about adding that, trying to win. I think definitely Darius Garland being out most of the year, they had a lot of issues and just were concerned about injury risks with him. So they decided to, switch it up and go for James Harden. We'll see how it works. Honestly, in my opinion, I think this may end up being a win for the Clippers in the end, because they're going to get a 26-year-old two-time All-Star, which, once he gets healthy, if he can play well, you got to lock at the point guard position. And he did well for Cleveland until the injuries, obviously, in the playoffs last year than this year. But, if you look at that, definitely think if you're the Clippers, you got a big win now. And for Cleveland, you got to win. There's no excuses now. If you don't win, then I think you're to the point where you got to make some big-time moves and maybe sell off some pieces. Because, this is clearly a win-now move. Honestly, I think they're probably better with Garland than with Harden. I think Harden has some teammate issues that make sense play-wise. I don't think he's the best, playmaker. When I think of Donovan Mitchell, I don't think that's exactly going to work out. We'll see how it goes. Last night, it did work out for him. Hopefully it works out, but just looking at Harden's history, with other teams when teaming up with superstars, it does not usually go well. Obviously, his big example is being, of course, in his time in Houston, him and Russell Westbrook didn't work out. Now it was supposed to be the big thing that would get them over the hump, obviously did not, and then he left for Brooklyn to join that super team of Kyrie and KD, which only lasted a year until he ran out again, and then obviously went to the 76ers. Actually, didn't really do too well there. Had some success, but not enough, and he had Joel Embiid as well as the second superstar. And he won multiple MVPs in that time when James Harden was there, and just didn't have much success. So definitely think when it comes to James Harden teaming up with superstars, he doesn't have the best track record, if anything, and then also there's some loyalty issues there as well with Harden. So, in my honest opinion, I think the Cavs probably should have just kept Garland. I don't think Harden was really worth it. But, currently at the moment, Harden can play and Garland can't, and I think that's what the Cavs looked at in the end. Is they need an all-star point guard who could play, and Harden could. At the moment, physically, and just Garland being injured, just couldn't physically play. Because they look at this right now as they need to win, and they need to win now. I don't think there's really any more waiting time after last year. That spectacular regular season and a disappointing end. They know that this is the year they do have to win, or else, what's going to happen if they don't win? And I think that's a good question to ask. So I think definitely, in the perspective of the Cavs trying to win as soon as possible, specifically this year, this probably being the best shot for the Celtics, being all banged up, I think definitely, you see why they made the move, but I think it's definitely a very questionable move. Training a 26-year-old, two-time All-Star for, James Harden is one of the best point guards in the game, a 36-year-old whose decline probably will be starting within a year or two, and also has significant loyalty issues as well. It does help them at least get closer in cap space. If they wanted to make another big move, they could. But definitely, I think for the Cavs, when you look at it, hopefully it works out. I just don't really see exactly how Harden and Donovan Mitchell are going to really work well together, just because they're very similar players, with very pass force, make the offense through them, like just give it to them and they'll score. I think they're both players who that's how they play. So I'm interested to see how exactly that works out and how they coexist. Obviously, there were some questions after the first year, 2 years of Garland and Mitchell. How do they coexist? And obviously, the Cavs coach Kenny Atkinson did figure that out last year. So I would say, if anyone's going to figure it out, I do believe he can figure it out for the Cavs. But when you look at this, definitely I feel like a move that's more questionable than not. But if it gets the Cavs to the championship and gives them an NBA Finals, it's really not going to matter as much, because at the end of the day, you're trying to win championships, and this gets you to a championship, then that's how you get there. But I honestly, in my opinion, just look at this and I think, probably not the best move. I would have kept Garland, but, they did what they did, and hopefully for the Cavs, they can, make it worth it. But obviously, a couple other big trades as well. Obviously, the Wizards squad, Anthony Davis, Mavericks got a good haul for him. So, the Luka Doncic trade from last year, as crazy as it was, keeps building on. And the Wizards now get a star center who, well, hopefully can stay healthy. But, knowing Anthony Davis probably won't happen. But, they definitely upgrade their roster. And I think the Wizards, they're starting to become an interesting team. I mean, you look at that, they got some interesting players in the building now. Obviously, the Trae Young trade they just made this year, they've made two pretty big trades. I got two good players, obviously. Trae Young did some great stuff when he was in Atlanta. Obviously, didn't win much of anything because the Atlanta Hawks just aren't really that great of an organization. But, they looked at that, and he did well there. And I think it's a good trade for Washington, getting a guy like him. I think for Trae Young, it didn't make too much sense while he wanted to go to Washington. I'm not sure what about the Wizards is really that enticing. Obviously, they've had a couple top picks, but, they don't really have a great track record of being good. So, if you look at that, it's like, if you want to go to a new team, I feel like you may have downgraded a little bit from the Hawks to the Wizards, but the way the Wizards have been moving now, I think definitely a couple moves now, Anthony Davis as well. And they do have some interesting young players. I think Trey Johnson is one of them. You like it, there's some decent players there, obviously. They got some good talent there. And it's something to watch as well, just to see, what could happen. Obviously, Carrington, another great guy there that's coming in the mix, a lot of young talent, and I think for the Wizards, they're now in actually a pretty interesting spot. Like, I don't think they'll make the playoffs this year. Maybe they will, but I think, now they have two All-Stars. They add two All-Stars to their team, and they got some great young talent. Obviously, Saw, Carrington, Johnson, and you got other young guys as well coming in to that group. I think for the Wizards, that makes a lot of sense to do it, If they are looking to contend, which I think by this point, it's been long enough now that for the rebuild that they should be seeing results. I think they're trying to take that next step, and while Anthony Davis isn't probably the best bet in my opinion, I don't look at that and I'm like, that's a great move, Exactly, but I do think, it's not even like an ultra-changing move, like, say, for instance, when he got traded to the Lakers. But I do look at that as, that's the next step to get this team to becoming a playoff team and potentially, starting to compete for championships. So I think the Wizards now obviously on the right track, and it's looking good for them. I think Mavericks as well, Anthony Davis, that was just a bad move. Obviously, Nico Harrison now fired, but it was just a bad move. It should not have been made, and I think, clearly his time in Dallas was complete injury riddled like usual with him. And he just didn't do enough, so for Dallas to be able to sell him off and get that good of a haul after the disaster of the Doncic trade, in my opinion, for Dallas, that's a great win. And they got some quality players coming over in that trade as well. So I think, for both sides, it's about an even trade. I think, Washington improves themselves with Davis once he gets healthy to potentially be in playoff contention. If it's, I don't really think this year, but I would say next year, they're starting to look at that, especially the young guys. And I think for Dallas, that was a large contract. You can take that off. You get some quality players and some picks, and you can start building on Cooper Flag, which obviously, he is the face of the franchise for Dallas now. So they're going to get, to start building around him. And I think definitely moving Davis out helps another guard. Obviously, opens up a spot for Derek Lively to come in and start playing. So we'll see how that goes with both sides. Definitely another big move from there. And then the last one, obviously, and this is definitely the most crazy one in my opinion, is not crazy on the one team side, but I think who traded for him is a little crazy. But obviously, Jalen Jackson Jr. traded from the Memphis Grizzlies to the Utah Jazz. Definitely, I think Utah is a little surprising because they're usually a team that's middle of the road, and the last couple of years have been pretty bad ever since trading Donovan Mitchell and Rudy Gobert a couple years ago and starting that rebuild. But it does look like they're starting to see a lot of progress. Obviously, the Mitchell trade has, given some good, quality players. Definitely, I think Lauri Markkanen has been the big one. That's been a big help from us. He's really immersed in his time with the Jazz. Cody Kessler, another one. Definitely, they're starting to build a good group there, and they already have a pretty great, front court. They look to add it, and then today on the deadline they make the big trade for Jalen Jackson Jr. from the Memphis Grizzlies, who obviously was one of the core players for the Grizzlies. Giving up a couple picks won't get them, but they're building a good quality team. I always say this, that's definitely a fun quarter. Those three guys, it's going to be pretty tough to play against. Like, the big guys, they can get rebounds, they can score. Specifically, Markkanen can score. So, you look at that. And I think for the Jazz, they're in a better spot. I think Ace Bailey as well. It's another guy who's, they're looking to see what he can do. I think they're starting to build up a team that actually looks like it's starting to get ready for playoff contention as well. So I think, this move is, not going to make them a championship contender. It's putting them on the path, definitely, to, get better. And I think for Memphis as well, this is good because Memphis clearly is looking now at rebuilding again. They just didn't think this core of Ja Morant and Jalen Jackson was working out well, so they've decided to start to tail down a little bit. Obviously, those players, Ja Morant didn't get traded, but that's probably a little bit of a tougher one to trade off just because of, how good a player is and what the demand would be to trade him away. So I think definitely for them, they look at that as potentially, could have been better, but, at the end of the day, they just probably can't trade him at the deadline. Probably have to wait till the offseason if they want to. But then again, he's a player that, you're not really exactly wanting to trade unless you want to, because the talent's there, obviously, they got. There's definitely some character issues that are well documented with him. But, I think for Memphis, they look at it's probably about time they move on from that core and start a rebuild again. They really just didn't do too much. They didn't have any playoff success, really. They were a 2 seed, but, they played over pretty bad by the Lakers a couple years ago. I think that was about 2 years now, if I remember correctly. They just haven't been able to make noise in the postseason, and then they've started to struggle in regular season. Last year they struggled, and then again this season they struggled, and it got to the point it's like, this wasn't the group that was going to win it for Memphis, so they decided to move off and start going in a different direction. And honestly, in my opinion, that's probably the right thing for them to do, because this core just didn't look like it was going to do much, if anything, for them. So that was obviously the big news in the NBA this week, and that crazy NBA trade deadline. Obviously, a couple more pieces got traded off, but, we gotta get the Super Bowl, so they don't have too much more time. So I just want to hit the big ones there. Moving on here today, obviously Super Bowl Sunday, and the big matchup is the 1-seeded Seattle Seahawks of the NFC facing off against the 2-seed New England Patriots in a showdown that's going to be very interesting to watch, especially because two of these teams last year were not in the playoffs. Both the Seahawks and the Patriots were not in the playoffs. Honestly, Seattle, I think, just missed it by a couple of games. I think they're just under 500 quickly. Don't have the exact number there, but the Patriots obviously 4-13, had the 4th overall pick. Obviously had, Jordan Mayo did not go well. Obviously fouled him after 1 year after, getting off of Bill Belichick and moving on from the Tom Brady era. Obviously had a complete disaster of a year, but they did get a quarterback last year named Drake May, and, he did pretty well as a rookie, so they started to see some potential signs of a turnaround. Obviously this year, the big moves, they made a lot of big moves, obviously, hiring Mike Vrabel, a coach that had a lot of great success in a franchise like the Tennessee Titans, which usually is not well known to having success, obviously, but, he pulled off getting a 1 seed. They had playoff victories. They got close to Super Bowls, and they had a lot of success there until that A.J. Brown trade that they made after a contract dispute, taking him to Philly. So definitely, he had a lot of success with the Titan organization. He had assistants. They got head coaching jobs, specifically Arthur Smith, the big one, obviously got a job in Atlanta for the work he did in Tennessee. So he obviously was the hottest head coaching candidate next to Ben Johnson last year. And honestly, in my opinion, was probably a safer bet than Johnson just because he had experience to back it up. That Johnson really didn't have as head coach. He had Austin as an OC, but not as head coach. So I think for the Patriots getting Vrabel, like they were looking for a guy to be their next Belichick. And, he was a slam dunk. You knew the minute he was getting hired by them. You knew this was going to be a slam dunk for him. Obviously, didn't think it would be 1 year time until he got back to the Super Bowl. But, the minute that they had him, you knew they were going to get back here pretty soon. Within the next couple of years. But, obviously it's daunting everyone. And it's been 1 year, and they're already back. So, I think we're all happy to not see the Patriots, for the last couple of years. The Chiefs got annoying. So the Patriots are back. And they got a whole new roster of a lot of great players. Drake May, the quarterback, finished second in MVP voting by 1 vote. Tackle sophomore season, I think a lot of times, specifically in this last couple of years, I think we've seen a lot of the great rookie quarterbacks come in their second year. They don't do any real close to as well as they did the first year, obviously. I think one example of that is Stroud. He had a great rookie year. Look at him now the last 2 years. Been completely horrid. Though I think the offensive line's to blame there for a good bit, but, definitely they look at that. You see a lot of sophomore slaps. Obviously, Jane Daniel, rookie of the year last year, looked like a spectacular quarterback. And then this year, injury riddled and just didn't play that well. And the Commanders really struggled without him. And it clearly showed, as very bad record this year. But, definitely I think for a quarterback, second year, to not only take the jump, which when you look at quarterbacks, you want to see him take the jump from year 1 to year 2. Like, as rookie, you're just looking for him to make some good plays and help you win games. By this point, you're just kind of depending on them by year 2. You are depending on them to make those plays consistently to win you games. And, I think a lot of quarterbacks, specifically recently, they have struggled with that second year, but Drake May obviously has not been one of those guys. I will say this, I think that 2024 draft class, a lot of the guys, honestly, they have not had that second year slump. Other than Daniels, they haven't had a second year slump. Obviously, for the most part, of the top 3 drafters, obviously, Penix has a different discussion now. I think Penix and both McCarthy, different discussions, but those were questionable picks in the first round to begin with, so I don't really want to consider those two as much involved in, as say, the big 3, honestly, in opinion. And I think, Bo Nix as well has not had a sophomore slump as well, which is kind of odd to see. Like, usually, most of them have sophomore slumps. None of them did. Honestly, I think all 3 of them actually improved. I think May improved a good bit, though I think out of the 3, Williams had the most improvement, but definitely, you look at what May did this season, he really took that Patriots offense to a new level, obviously, getting McDaniels back, he's not a great head coach, but he is a heck of an OC. A lot of the reason why the Patriots had success is because of him, and it looks like he's doing it again for the Patriots, and he's got Drake May playing a little bit like Tom Brady out there, which is not a good sight for, the other fans of teams, but, definitely the Patriots are looking back well and alive, and they have got a great offense. Obviously, Stephon Diggs, they brought him in. He has been good for them. Demario Douglas has played well. Kayshon Boutte has been a surprise sensation this year. He's come out big in a lot of big spots this season for them. They look at that, definitely is going well. I think the running back tandem, Rhamondre Stevenson, he's got somewhat back to the form that he had a couple years ago when he was going off. He is starting to get back to that. I think Tre'Davian Henderson as well, the rookie of Ohio State, he was drafted with high regards. He has looked great when he has played. I think the one issue that they've had is they haven't played him as much as they should be. But when he has played, he has looked phenomenal for the Patriots. And also with their 4th overall pick, Campbell at the left tackle, he has been spectacular for him. He has protected Drake May. And that's an offensive line that went from not being a very good offensive line to being a great offensive line that helps facilitate that great offense that is the Patriots offense. I think definitely on the defensive side of the ball, definitely they're a young team, but they're looking great. Christian Gonzalez, in his 3rd year now, is really coming to his own. He is playing great, and he is really helping that defense together as a whole. Play some phenomenal ball, obviously. It's not the most star-studded defense in the NFL, but, they got guys like Spillane, Landry the third, Chase Hahn, who's, turned into a pretty good player for the Patriots. They have guys that are going in there and they are playing well. And they are beating teams with defense. They're not beating them like, say, the Texans will with the defense, or Seattle has this year, but, they have a defense that can keep them in games and let the offense do enough it needs to do that they can win games. And I think for the Patriots, well, it's not always pretty for them this year, they have been able to consistently win games, which in the NFL, if you can consistently win games, you can go far, and just look at what they've done. In 1 year of a coaching change, they're already in the Super Bowl and looking at getting number 7. Moving on the other side here, we have the Seattle Seahawks, and this team had a lot of chance in the offseason, obviously, switching quarterbacks, getting away from Geno Smith, which was a very good move, looking at what he did for the Raiders this year, and bringing in, I wouldn't say a questionable decision, but definitely one that was like, people were after him, but there were questions of would he be able to keep up what he did in Minnesota, and that is Sam Darnold. With last year, starting as a backup in Minnesota to McCarthy before the injury, and then coming in and then getting them to a great record and getting them into the wild card. Well, obviously, they didn't do well in the playoffs, but, he had that Minnesota team playing great. So it was a gamble for them for the Seattle, but this is a gamble that really has worked out well. Sam Darnold has, I think, probably had the best season of his career so far. I think he's played phenomenal. And he's got that Seattle offense playing great. And, definitely, they had a lot of other moves. Obviously, DK Metcalf was one they trade off. It seemed like it was a big loss. Tyler Lockett as well. And it seemed like really Seattle was trying to rebuild. But really, it seems like it was more of a retool. As Jackson Smith-Njigba, who, last 2 seasons, I thought, he looked good, but, you expect a little more from him. He has truly come into it as, honestly, I would say the NFL's best wide receiver right now. He's been spectacular. And he's been a driving force for the Seahawks offense as well, with Kenneth Walker and Zach Charbonnet, who is out now for the year, but definitely early in the year, Charbonnet was doing good things for him, along with Walker. At the running back position, obviously Cooper Kupp has come in, and he's been a pretty good veteran, leader on that team, and he's done some stuff receiving-wise. Obviously, not the same wide receiver he was, but he has been productive enough to help get that offense and take them to the next level, as they are looking to do. And, offense-wise, they've played spectacular. So, they score a good bit of points, and they play well. They play efficiently. I think they're very similar to the Patriots in that regard, as, they're not the most star-studded offense, but they got guys that can play well. I think the main difference between those two teams, however, is Seattle does have a premier wide receiver in Zach Smith-Njigba. While Stephon Diggs was one, I wouldn't say he fully is that again, as he was, with the Bills or the Vikings. Still a good wide receiver, though, and definitely one you got to respect. But, I think that is the one difference between those two offenses. Seattle does have a premier wide receiver in Zach Smith-Njigba, and I think that definitely is what put those offenses, when you put them head-to-head, that definitely is what helps edge them out, because they both have great offensive lines, great running games, good quarterbacks. I would say I think the Patriots have the better of the quarterbacks there between the two. But I think, they're very similar teams in a lot of regards. I think this is definitely one of the more evenly balanced ones we've seen in a while, like just the way the rosters are built. So it's definitely going to be very interesting. And then defense, I think for Seattle, that's the big story. They have some spectacular players on defense, especially in that secondary. Obviously, they have Witherspoon there, who's done spectacular for them. And he was a big-time pick a couple years ago. He has looked great. Week Woolen, no one in the secondary. He did give up a couple big plays in the NFC Championship game, but overall, he has played a lot better and gone back to rookie form. I think Nick Amani, definitely the rookie this year, he has done spectacular at that safety position, and it's been a stabilizing force for that defense. Definitely linebacker-wise, they're looking a lot better than they have been. Not exactly at least in the boom days, but, they play well, they play hard, and they can get the job done. I think on offense, on the defensive line, you look at that, it's a great defensive line, a lot of great picks. They bought some veterans like, DeMarcus Lawrence from the Cowboys was brought in. He has done well for them, and they've just been building over time. Leonard Williams, another guy they've had for a couple years now, but they've been using him, and consistently they get to the quarterback. They play hard. They were a tough defense to play against. I think specifically throwing the ball to them in the secondary, that's the toughest spot, because they do well. They get turnovers, they get sacks, and they play hard, and they play hard to win. I think, obviously, you look at both teams, their defenses, they do well. They hold teams consistently about under 20 points a game. They both do that. Both offenses score pretty high, I will say this, though, for the Patriots, I think in the playoffs this year, they haven't been scoring as high as they won in the regular season. I think they have struggled a little bit more on that score side of things. But, their defense has been able to make up the big plays that help them win those games, specifically, last week, the AFC Championship game, 2 weeks ago now. But, to be fair, they weren't really scoring. But I also say, it was a snowstorm in the second half, so that would also be another reason why they weren't scoring. But, I feel like that, even that Texans game the week before, they were down scoring a little bit. So I think they haven't been scoring as well as they were. But, they have been scoring consistently. Drake May's been playing pretty well in the playoffs. I think not as well as he was in the regular season, but he has been playing well enough to win. And that's all that matters in the playoffs is you play well enough to win. He has done that. And if you look at both teams, they're both hard-fought teams, had a lot of changes in the last 2 years, whether it be trading away star players like Seattle did last season, or, getting a new coach, trying to figure out how this rebuild works that New England did. And I think definitely both sides is, I think both teams have worked hard, whether you like it or not, that the Patriots are back. They've, obviously worked hard to get from where they were to where they are now. So I think definitely look at this. Should be a good game on both sides. So let's look here. Now, obviously, it's time for the prediction. I think last year I didn't get to do one, so I wasn't able to make a Super Bowl episode, but last 2 years before that I did, and I got pretty accurate on both. I think I remember for 57, I said it'd be a game-winning field goal for the Chiefs, and that happened. And then I said the year before, 49ers would blow a big lead, and the Chiefs would somehow win. Yeah, that happened as well. So let's see what the prediction is going to be here. So I think out of these two teams, both look great quarterback play, great running back play, and I think the offenses are going to play well today, but I think the defenses are going to make their mark in this game. I think both teams have good defenses, and I think those defenses are going to hem in both offenses pretty well, but I think at the end of the day, it's going to, just depend on what offense can play better than the other one. Like, which one can break through all the tough defensive blocks, and I think out of the two, I think Seattle has the better, offense. I think Jack Smith-Njigba, he is the game changer. The Emerald City Route Runner, he is the game changer. And I think for Seattle, that is the key. If they can consistently get him the ball, I think Seattle will win that game. I think Sam Darnold, I don't think he needs to prove to us he is a good quarterback, that he can throw the football. I think he's proven that. I don't think I need to say anything. Like, I'm not worried about him throwing the football against the Patriots, like I probably would have been last year. This was a game last year, and it was the Vikings. But I think if you look at this, it just depends on what the offense can do. Definitely, you can't discount Drake May and what Drake May can do. I don't think you can, and I honestly want to say, out of these two teams, I'm going to give Seattle. I think that's who's winning, but I think this game's going to get interesting, and I wouldn't be surprised if there's a controversial call at the end of the game. But I think scoring-wise, I'm going to go, I still think they're going to both teams are at least going to score 20, just because there's pretty high-powered offenses right now, star-studded, they can produce, and I think both teams will get close to it. But I'm going to go, honestly, in my opinion, I'm going to say 28-24 Seattle, and I think Seattle's going to win it close in about the fourth quarter, I would say. Maybe 3 minutes in. We'll say about like 3 minutes left on the clock. They'll give Drake May a shot, but I think the Seattle defense will definitely shut them down now. And I think Seattle's going to win the Super Bowl. So I'm going with Seattle here with the final score, 28-24. And Super Bowl MVP, I'm going to go with the Emerald City Route 1. Jackson Smith-Njigba. I think he's going to have a huge game. I think Tristan Gonzalez is going to try to shut him down best he can. But I think at the end of the day, they're going to be able to shift Gonzalez off to other guys. Seattle's going to be able to force that. And I think Smith-Njigba's going to be able to make some big impacts like he has all year. And I think Seattle is going to get their second Super Bowl championship. So I hope you guys enjoyed this episode. Definitely a big game tonight. Hope you guys have a great time. Thank you guys for watching and have a great day.